Now, Douglas Chin, the Attorney General of Hawaii, also Maria Elena Incapie, the Executive Director of the National Immigration Law Center, representing one of the Dreamers deported under this new policy, as well as Christina Greer, Associate Professor of Political Science at Fordham University. Hello, everyone. Mr. Attorney General, what do you think the view there from Hawaii on this back and forth about a judge in the Pacific?
Well, you know, first of all, there's nothing that Attorney General Sessions is doing that's a surprise. I mean, he made racist comments several decades ago. He's still referring to classes of people in a way that disenfranchises them, minimizes them, makes them second-rate citizens, and this is... It's not really a surprise. I also have to say this. I was in a meeting back in February where Jeff Sessions, Attorney Generals, addressed all of the 50 state Attorney Generals, and including me. I was in the audience, and that was his first line. Was crime is up. It's the highest it's ever been. Murder is at an all-time high. He was saying that to all 50 of us, and we were all looking at each other, say, I don't think that's actually true. I think crime's down. I never heard that crime was up, and yet here he is today, you know, telling us as if we can't even check something like that, that crime is on the upswing. So there you go.
Christina, there does seem to be a kind of a weird, that's the nice way to put it, or just misleading emphasis from the Trump administration here on the actual facts on crime. The DOJ police thing, no one was expecting that, and out of the blue here they're fighting about the crime rate, which, as we showed, is not up in New York. So if your argument is they're doing something wrong here, and there's plenty of debate on policing policy, if your argument is you're doing something wrong here, you're going to be found out pretty quickly.
Right, but that doesn't matter for Trump supporters, right? This is clearly a racialized tactic to say, when they say crime, they're trying to make this dog whistle, dog bark, where it's blacks, it's Latinos, it's quote-unquote illegal immigrants who are driving up this crime and making everyone unsafe. That's why we need to put all of our money, not in education, not in healthcare, but to build a wall, right, which will cost billions of dollars, which we as Americans are going to pay for, and not Mexico. That's why we need to put another $54 billion into our military to secure us from domestic terrorism, international terrorism. So it's creating this boogeyman scenario to justify their spending, essentially, and it's not going to be for the American people. The problem is the Republican Party in Congress is co-signing what are basically flat-out lies. We have the data. New York is one of the safest cities in the country. It's safer than it's been in decades. So to say this, we can look at facts, but many of the Trump supporters don't want facts. They just want to hear these sound bites of the president and Jeff Sessions just saying things that quite honestly aren't true, and they're deliberately misleading. And I think the beauty of the Constitution, which is why I hope it holds up, is that the Founding Fathers actually planned for this type of nonsense and shenanigans. They put in these various trapdoors to make sure that the president didn't have a blank check. They put judges in the power, they gave power to judges to make sure that they didn't have a tyrant, sort of like King George, and someone who could spend money and do all of these things to make sure that, you know, we didn't have this scenario. So we have to just stay vigilant.
Well, you make such an important point, because you're talking about what Jeff Sessions called amazing, or what he was implying was negative, that, oh, one judge can do this, when that's the whole point. The founders said, yes, one independent judge who's not thinking about partisanship, who's not thinking about fundraising, who's not thinking about all the things that they think about in Washington. Yeah, he's out there in what you might call the Pacific Hawaii heartland, if you want to call it that.
One of the 50 states.
But it's a state.
It is a state.
And in that heartland of that state, it's an independent judge making that determination. Maria Elena, on the facts in dispute, I want to play for you Secretary John Kelly speaking about your client, this one dreamer who has now gotten a lot of attention in the crosshairs of what is and isn't happening. But John Kelly basically saying that you guys are wrong and alleging that there were crimes committed. Take a listen so we can get your response.
He had DACA status up until, I think, 2018, I believe, but because of his irresponsible behavior, according to the rules set up by President Obama, he lost that status. He was convicted for theft. He had gone illegally into Mexico, and then we caught him coming back in. That's a felony. He also had a series of driving violations or driving without a license or something like that. So again, not just one thing, but the big news should be that he did not have DACA status by his own actions, and he was deported.
Maria Elena?
Thanks, Ari, for the opportunity to talk about our courageous client, Juan Manuel Montes. You know, what Secretary Kelly and actually President Trump have said about our client is exactly what law enforcement officers and communities of color experience all the time, that when somebody courageously comes out against the actions of the Trump administration, in this case, that they try to attack the client, try to attack the individual. Our client unequivocally has stated time and time again that he was physically deported from this country. The reason we've filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against this administration is because DHS did not respond to our request. All we're trying to find out is why. How is it that someone with DACA was deported, and how do we prevent this from happening again? We
Just
actually
to be clear,
did in our filing.
Yeah, they say that he left. You're saying that's false.
Absolutely, right. First of all, they said that he didn't. The first thing they said was that he didn't have DACA, so that's where they begin with the false information. Then they backtracked the following day, said, yes, he did have DACA, but actually he left voluntarily. Well, we wouldn't be bringing a lawsuit if he had left voluntarily. He was physically deported, not given an opportunity to call his family to get his wallet. He wasn't given an opportunity to go before an immigration judge. He was deported. He did try to come back the next day because he was scared. Mexico is not his home country. He has lived in California since he was 9 years old, and he has a cognitive disability from a childhood brain injury, and understandably he was trying to get back home, and he was detained. The question is, how and why was he deported the first time?
Mr. Attorney General, on the Hawaii case, which of course is why everyone was talking about your state, where do we go from here, and are you confident in later victories? Right now it's blocked at a procedural level, the travel ban.
An hour ago, we filed our opposition brief to the appeal that was made by the Department of Justice to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and we're set to argue in front of the Ninth Circuit on our case on May 15th, 9:30 a.m. in Seattle. So we're ready to go on that. And then after the decision is made by that Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, then in all likelihood there probably will be an appeal. And I just want to add one more thing, because there's something that's very inaccurate that Attorney General Sessions is making right now, where he keeps talking about how there's just one judge in the middle of the Pacific who made this decision. The fact is, there's a judge in Virginia who's right next to Jeff Sessions who would have also made that decision. He also has an injunction that's been issued, and that's why it's up on appeal in the Fourth Circuit. Not to mention that there was a Washington State judge that also issued a ban on the travel ban, a TRO on the travel ban, as well as the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So to imply that there's just one judge out of 700 judges in America is just very inaccurate, and it ignores the fact that there have been a lot of states that have spoken up against this.
Right. I mean, it would be lawful if it was just one judge, because that's how it works, but you're making the point that in addition to having sort of their constitutional theory wrong, they also just can't count judges. Ninth Circuit is what, 20-plus judges, and they, of course, also were involved in the first travel ban, which some have argued is substantially similar. So plenty to pick from there. I want to get Christina Greer back in on the wall. You know, it's Friday night. You know, we like to have a nice Friday night here. We had a nice Friday night vibe, and I want to talk to you about whether the government's going to shut down as a nice Friday night topic. Let me read Donald Trump here on what might be worth shutting it down. Quote, "I want the border wall. My base definitely wants the border wall." Trump said this in an Oval Office interview. Asked whether he would sign legislation that doesn't include money for that, here with a looming shutdown deadline, he said, "I just..."
There's so many things that this president just doesn't know yet. I mean, we don't even have ambassadors in the countries that we're sort of playing frog with. When it comes to the wall, keep in mind he promised his base that not only would he build it day one, that Mexico would pay for it. Mexico has made it abundantly clear that they are not paying for it. His base still wants this wall. Logistically, it's not going to be a contiguous wall. It's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars over budget.
Looking at the deadline of next weekend, do you think his base would be happy if there was a government shutdown over this?
Well, it depends on what he says to his base, right? I mean, he clearly blatantly lies, right? And we have to call it lies. Like, we can't keep saying that he's misspeaking and he's misleading. He is lying to the American public and sort of creating this presidency of chaos. So he recognizes that this arbitrary 100 days is swiftly coming up. He needs to give his base something more than, I gave you a conservative judge that just helped execute a man in Arkansas, right? Everything else has pretty much been a loss or clearly not what he promised he would do these first 100 days. So if there is a government shutdown, it really depends on how he frames it to his base, because they really don't want facts and truth. He can just say it's the Democrats' obstruction.